Hello and welcome back, everybody out there, to Table Talk RPG, the interview series covering all things tabletop role-playing from Andrews McNeil Universal. I'm your anonymous host, and this week we're lucky to be joined by Blackbird's RPG art director and visual designer, Rob Sather. Welcome, Rob.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, it's so nice to have you. We have so much Blackbird's news coming up within the next couple months. We couldn't not get you in. It's really, really exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So generally the way that we handle these is we really, really love talking to guests a little bit about their own backgrounds, a little bit about their own influences and experiences, kind of within their own fields and then within tabletop kind of in general. And then as a second half, we move on to talking about how that's influenced what they're working on, in this case, Blackbirds. So I wanted to begin by asking you a few questions about yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about your first encounter with fantasy or horror media and kind of how that drew you into where you are now and eventually into Blackbirds?
Yeah, of course. I know I got to loop back. Sometimes my long-term memory fails me at times, but yeah, no. So for me, fantasy was always something that caught my eye, even as a little kid. All the way up to where I am now. But specifically, a lot of it. So what's interesting is a lot of the media, I think maybe some people would note, and for me, obviously video games or specific movies, things I will obviously click into fantasy, especially even dark fantasy. But a lot of my inspiration even growing up was specifically through fine art and visual art. So a lot of the time, growing up and being the kid and sort of the corner, I think the tale as old as time for a lot of us introverted creatives. Me finishing my calculus homework or something, and then just doodling or imagining and storyboarding just for the fun of it. And so a lot, even when I was younger, I was really oddly enough into the surrealist movement. So you got your Dali's, kind of that served a huge space for me and learning more about the historical context surrounding those artist movements. And then honestly, it really emerged past that into individuals like Caspar David Friedrich. So these like beautiful, in the 1800s, like mausoleum and graveyard landscapes, just absolutely gorgeous. So mix all of that as I was becoming a little art historian, probably when I was like 12, 13, tops, probably even younger to some extent if I wasn't reading about medieval history or anything as a pastime. It was also, I will fully admit that for me, in terms of big media, it was absolutely Lord of the Rings, specifically the movies. So definitely that whole entire trilogy, I watched just hundreds of times, and I think that between that and reading a little bit of like even just dare I say like Dale, like some of these old the Drizzt novels, like that was kind of a basis as well. But very much I've done my own level of disconnect from that over the years, where honestly tabletop is really kind of something that brought me back into that, needless to say.
I love that you mentioned the Drizzt novel because the art on the cover of that is like firmly ingrained into my own brain.
Yes. Yeah, like and just as a younger kid growing up and going to more of like a conservative high school and being in that area, I sort of just heavily diverted over that over the years. But yeah, like I think for me, and it's just so strange because I feel very much like my life has been always, my work too has always been interconnected with tabletop. But I will fully admit that I'm still like a fresh face as a whole. Really, I didn't get into tabletop in a full scope or really realizing a passion for it probably until 2015. So just pretty much me getting out of college, figuring out kind of things I was interested in, and that's when a lot of the birth of actual plays started percolating a little bit more. Twitch was kicking off even further, so I ended up just connecting into a few different communities there. and ended up kind of as a whole, connecting with local friends and going from there. So, but for me, I think it's always just an interesting note for me to say that a lot of my history with tabletop is, it's not like I've been playing D&D since I was 10 years old or anything. I think I've been familiar with it. My father, I remember always him chatting about it with us when we were younger, about just, when he was growing up playing D&D. It was a communal sort of get together, but I never like put two and two together until I started actually being more self-aware in my own circles. So yeah, like, and honestly, and by the way, I'm also just like a massive think talker, so feel free to stop me at any time.
No, not at all. That's
it's
what
all connected. I promise, it's all connected. But yeah, so there have been inklings building up as a whole, but really, I didn't dive into it until I was out of college. I met some people who were excited enough to run, I believe it was Dungeon World. My good friend Steven ran Dungeon World for me for the first time. Really enjoyed the system of like Apocalypse World and in general. But then it kind of produced more where I started out much more into the indie scene. So playing like solo RPGs, everything from, some one-offs here or there. So that ultimately led me to discovering and kind of looking more into Lancer, which, if people know Lancer, the mech, basically lots of mechs, hot-looking mechs from Massive Press. So Tom, obviously, from Kill 6 Billion Demons fame, as well as Miguel, who I believe even does narration at Wizards now, which is amazing. But yeah, like that was really the kind of the first area where, for me, RPGs were not only just enjoyable, but I realized there was just this realization that the visual design was so impertinent to user experience. um, that was the cascade, and obviously I can continue to go on from there, but that I always highlight that was the trajectory point. That was probably 2019, so again, it's still very fresh. To be fully honest.
I really love that you, in particular, started from a fine arts background and kind of moved into more of a fantasy space. I think it's a really interesting kind of transition and movement between what a lot of people I think would think were very disparate kind of schools, which is it's interesting. I think the way the fantasy art is viewed continuously, because you have artists like Frazetta, where
Yeah.
somebody's very technically talented with light and with composition, with an anime, and they're kind of pushed aside when it comes to like contemporary discussion around fine art and around technical ability. But really building that aesthetic sense that moved into tabletop, do you think that contributed to the way that you approach design for Blackbirds and the overall kind of visual look and feel for it?
100 million to basically absolutely. Yeah, I will say, as someone, for me, who just ideates and thinks continuously, for me, I I have like a very emotional tie to art, especially even as a great tangent to music. Um, Both hand in hand for me are additional languages that I feel we can also connect deeper with each other's souls regarding aesthetics, regarding interest, and um, different types of mood, or takeaway points, different messages that we want to really communicate with each other. um, I think art and music is obviously two of the best ways to do that. Again, as someone who deals with sometimes fun issues with social cues, or deals with ways of learning through my own identity and exploration, and not really having like an understood language for it. A lot of what I've done for myself, but also just in my work, is utilizing and referencing the creations of others, that have come before me, or that are right alongside me. to best communicate, to form these extra degrees of communication. And I realized, honestly, that methodology, especially with blackbirds, really was key. It creates more of a collective connection and understanding, while also allowing people to remain and invigorate their own individual takes and ideations for, say, like a creative brief. So definitely, in terms of approaching with blackbirds, similar to what I did with Lancer, or my contributions with for Lancer, um, a lot of it really comes down to taking all that, filtering it down to creating an optimal user experience, and not just like UX or the functionality, but also just ensuring people have a good time. There is a way of communicating systems and structures in a way that still allows people to have choice, to people to have this just sense of exploration, but giving them a trajectory. So absolutely, for me, uh, especially just in my own work with art direction in general, those are typically my two weapons of choice, if you will. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I really enjoy the framing of art, especially functional art, when it comes to layout and design in games as a way to improve or evoke communication, whether that is the impetus in being towards narrative, or whether it's accessibility, or whether it's evoking a look and feel for a world. And when it comes to Blackbirds in particular, Blackbirds is a world set in a time where gods are dead and kind of battling all the arcs have taken. This remains of what's left after something so cataclysmic happens, and so there's this kind of overarching sense of despair, or melancholy, you can frame it as, that pervades this place. Well, at the same time, there's so many intricacies that come down to just character to character approach. When you really think of the Lands of Erebus, when you think of Blackbirds as a game overall, what do you think is the primary kind of feeling, or what do you think is the primary theme that you feel looking at this book, when you look at the layout, when you look at the text, the choices that have been made with font and with artwork and with different typefaces? What was it that you were really hoping to evoke in players, or what was the sense that you wanted to give them as they encountered this for the first time?
Gosh, it's like I want to answer you with a reference to a song, but no, there's actually there's a fantastic what I'm even calling like a cinematic black metal album by the I believe they are German, called Doe Street, and there's a song there called The Third Door, and for me, I think just what I've always, and it's something I've referenced to Ryan, the creator of Blackbirds, about, and I think for me that song, as long as it is a great interpretation, and sort of I'm basing that off of where sort of my takeaway. It very much like it's the same. My takeaway for people, how I want them to feel about Blackbirds, is the same way that I felt when I was. And I'm going to be controversial here for a second, just so hold on. When I played Dark Souls 2, the best Dark Souls, honestly. I'm just gonna,
you can have your Poison Swamp. It's fine.
You can quote me. You can quote me. I kid, but I'm also just 170 hours into Elden Ring, so that's also a process. But in Dark Souls 2, honestly, my personal favorite piece of media within that game is the music and Majula, the bass area, and essentially the same with Doji's Thor. It's this understanding of sense of calm, uncertainty, hope, but also it's sort of recognizing how far you've come along in a journey, but how far you still have yet to go. There's an ominous, cathartic sense of glory, of personal achievement, of success, but at great cost. I think it's for me, and I could even have an entire discussion, because as someone who's been going back constantly into especially medieval history, looking at it again now with as a gender non-binary person, as a queer person, and having a very different lens, and more excited to really dig into that and re-explore that, is that similar in Blackbirds with its late medieval history influence, especially similar to like the works of Berserk and beyond, is that it's hard to like quickly show like the collapse per se, like it's of systems breaking down, and where you have to as an individual figure out where you fill the gaps, like who's a friend, who's a foe. Every single corner could potentially be the last movement that you make. And so for me, it really hones into those notions that I get from that music, from those feelings of that you are destined for greatness, like you have the abilities to be destined, or you have the destiny of dying in your own pool of blood from getting mugged into an alley. It's just, I think there's a frailty that is shown there, but it's very realistic. But the fact that like you have the tools to accomplish great things, but it's never guaranteed.
Something that I think is really interesting about this setting in particular is that traditionally when we look at like swords and sorcery games, or when we look at like the progression system that you find in like Pathfinder or D&D, or any other myriad of titles, it's really progression based. There's a notion that you start out as a hero, and over the course of time you encounter challenges, and you will encounter puzzles, and you will encounter things that encourage you to be better vis-a-vis like a point system, or leveling up, whatever it is. And ultimately, at the end of this journey, theoretically, there's this big bad that you're going to take down, and that's great. It's it's the hero's journey. It's the way that things have been handled for a really, really long time, and it allows for a lot of really narrative richness. And with Blackbirds, all of that kind of goes out the window, because the ultimate big bad, the worst possible thing that can happen has already happened. And this world now exists in the aftermath of really the loss of its framework, of the loss of the natural systems that guide it. And so you're just placed as an individual within this kind of unraveling time, and you have to decide what to do with that. And it's simultaneously the knowledge that there are these like great big extra cosmic horrors that you might not ever encounter, but that are shaping the world around you. And at the same time opens you to the limitless potential, as you said, to either become incredibly powerful, survive impossible odds, and make your dent somewhere in this unspooling worlds of tangled fate, or you end up like dead in a pool of your own barf because you ate the wrong thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say you gotta watch that. There's no Pepto here. There's unfortunately maybe there is, but unfortunately not in that immediate sense to settle that stomach of yours. Yeah, but yeah, like, and I think Blackbirds does and again, like I am somewhat biased because when Daniel from AMU as well as Ryan approached me to join the project, I mean, it was a sure case. I just had to sort of respond professionally and not like overtly excited, or at least right away, because this is my the dream. For me, this is the project that I get to go tell my younger self, like, hey, it gets better. Because like all that seemingly the weird stuff that like kids made fun of you for, like, this is it. Like, you're getting to have 9 p.m. Zoom calls where you get to talk about, like, how does a system collapse? How do people interact with it? What would be people's intentions and goals? Moving their way through the ash of a world that they once found comfort in, and now every day is uncertain. And I think for me, Blackbirds does an exceptional job on a narrative perspective, but on a system perspective, and hopefully we can evoke that within the art and everything of just this notion of the clapping, of Yggdrasil burning, of the fate now being cast aside from the greater powers. The old gods are gone, and I think just there's a fantastic sense of balance there, where it invokes the frailty of humans, no matter how well you're built. If you're going against these cosmic beings, or if anyone has seen the bestiary, there's some wild unfriendlies in there. The world can be cruel just from even looking at something the wrong way. But what I love is the implementation of the outsiders, of the fact that, and I think our lovely fellow developer Jared did get quoted on that, noting it, and if not Jared credit, I know that it's been repeated multiple times that the outsider, system, us obviously with our magic system of theurgy, is a dating, like basically a demon dating simulator. And take that however you will, but I love this idea. I've loved it since I first heard about it, where you get to build relationships with these otherworldly creatures, however midst you will. But there's always great cost. There's always this give and take. But and I think it's a great bridge of what you were noting about sort of that zero to hero mentality of, obviously games like D&D, even Pathfinder to a big extent, of, of at the end of the day being the hero. And I love the fact that Blackbird is like, you can do that, but you have to talk to a like mathematically effervescent spirit that can embody anything at will, and sometimes that's, you can't control it. Like, it's like you could accidentally eviscerate an entire town because you just didn't like, there was a disconnect between your relationship, or you made them upset because you started talking to someone in a court that they rivaled. It's a really fascinating way of creating, like, almost like comically level tension at the table of just not like of uncertainty. And I think that just is, but that's like, I think a lot of times, at least for me, why I love tabletop games is that it's just in some uncertainty of the dice, and creating where you have narrative uncertainty to align with that. I think just, I will talk up and down the team that put this game together, to the ends of the earth, because there's just a lot of really fascinating implementations and systems and Blackbirds that I can't wait for more and more people to try out.
Yeah, I'm really excited for more people to get their hands on it. Kickstarter is out now for free on
It is.
TTRPG if you want to get a quick early glimpse, with the full system coming out very, very soon. I have both of my copies of the books sitting at my desk here. I'm using them as like a chair, basically, because they're so big.
It's very unfair, because I think I'm like literally, I just can't wait for Gen Con to actually arrive so I can see it in person, because and I one of my big notions too that I did a lot, because I also worked with the lovely Hannah Hahn and Mary Gunport, who were the additional, the other, and I would say like primary in a lot of ways art directors, but sort of my focus was in a lot of the production work. And I am just so enthralled at both the actual produced copies, even for me it's still so exciting to see all of the incredible artwork and layout, digital versions, but definitely the, the actual hard copy ones are just absolutely gorgeous. And I'm so proud with how this turned out.
I'm really, really happy with them as well. It's really, really fun to hold them, just because they feel very much like a grimoire, gigantic. It feels like it came off a library shelf in another universe. It's fantastic. I love that you brought up Jared's discussion of really kind of the power systems that go on, and really how magic works within Black, in particular with the theurgy system. And it's really funny. He was on the show a little while ago, and he talked with us a lot about the notion of it being a demon dating simulator. And we kind of mined into that a little bit more, and talked about how something that's so fascinating about the theurgy system in the game is that it really makes you question systems of power, and it makes you realize how many things, especially in this world set, during the 100 Years' War, it really, really makes the actions that you do transactional, and it really, really puts emphasis on your decisions, because they do have such, when you're interacting with beings like this, or even on the small scale, if you're in a tiny town, talking to XYZ person, the fishmonger, whether it's whoever it's going to be, all of your choices have consequences. It makes you weigh to a certain degree your presence within this world, and what it's like to exist in a world where the source of magic is gone, where the traditional sources of power are gone, and where there's kind of this vacuum where there's different factions struggling for it. A lot of the art in the book really evokes or makes you feel kind of not the desperation, but this notion of this world being simultaneously infinitely possible and also really incredibly unforgiving.
Yes,
And there's like the color use, like certain pieces are incredibly visceral. I'm incredibly excited for people to get the books in their hands and be able to page through all of them. But I wondered in particular if there were any pieces in the book that are your particular favorites, or that you think really, really kind of embody the game as a whole, or that you gravitated to as you were working on those.
Yeah, no, that's, oh my goodness. That's, I mean, to be fair, you're asking me, if I have a favorite child, essentially, which of course I don't. I would never say that. Yeah, no. So for me, it was literally like it's just pure joy, of seeing our artist list and being able to work, um, with just so many talented and wonderful people, to give them briefs or anything. I will say on a personal note, a lot of my uh, work, at least on the end of the core book, was definitely on the product side, or on some of the specific details, or even more branding, graphic design elements. But definitely, I would say, for me, I'm just a huge fan of her work, with Aaron Vest, specifically with um, all of the true forms of the oligarchs. Those are just wickedly incredible. That I think just where you go from the late medieval sort of gothic horror elements um, to basically dream-like cosmic otherworldliness, if that's even a word. Just fantastic guidance on the rest of the teams and for her pieces. But I will always talk up Erin Vesta's work up and down. Um, I think Sherry will, I think, did a majority of the bestiary, and I think that is a whole section that just makes Blackbird sing. And I cannot emphasize enough continuously that it just any time that Sherry would be posting, as within, posting updates to us and getting feedback, it was just pure joy. Just the creativity, the development is just boundless. So for me, it was just, I wanted to match that energy in a lot of ways within the actual, specifically the graphic design. And I know it's not going to be uh, as like illustrated or as otherworldly, if you will. But for me, it was a way of capturing those, just that crazy creative ideation and execution on our artist teams in to facilitate that through a lot of the symbology and visual. Um, so yeah, like I'm in awe. Like basically every piece that came through was just so exciting to see. But I have to definitely call those two individuals out 100%.
Absolutely, some of the oligarch art is so striking. It's like Plague of Beauty. I continuously think about. It's
Yeah.
Is when Jared was, I always sat and talked about the Plague of Beauty for a good 20 minutes, just because all of the art surrounding her and all of her thematics and the writing are incredible. So I would absolutely have to echo that shout.
Yeah, and definitely for me, and I got thrown, not in this bad way at all, but I definitely got thrown into the deep end right away, because the first things I ever contributed to the game was the Court of Outsiders symbols. So that was the nameless. Just for some little history fun, little facts, the nameless court symbol was the first thing that I ever did. That really set the tone of sort of the simplified visual imagery, to capture. And I will say that Joseph, who did a lot of, I think the majority of the development when it came to theurgy, had some incredibly wildly specific briefs for each one of these, and I always continue to hope I did them justice. But once that visual itself was established, that sort of set the tone for the rest, and we went from there. But very much, for me, I come, aside from my fantasy and even like coming and enjoying the fine art and music, I have, years and years of brand management work, even on a corporate level, if you will. And so for me, I'm ingrained with transferability, consistency, these elements that seem pretty foreign, if you think for like sort of medieval proto-Renaissance. But they're, again, like when you revisit the medieval times and everything, I mean, that was the earliest times of branding. Like merchants were creating their own emblems to send on goods. So for me, it was a way of actually invoking real world references, even through like the path icons. So a lot of my work had to come into a lot of like, honestly, like the UI, the character sheets. So that's where I even spent a lot of my time.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more just about the design process with a lot of the symbols. And I think there's a challenge, especially when it comes to game design in particular, is in general, and feel free to correct me if I'm oversimplifying this, but I feel like in a lot of corporate communication and graphic design, there's such an emphasis on communicating really simplistic ideas, whether it's advertising or whether it's in the realm of creating graphics that can convey information in a way that is easily understandable. And the same thing applies as a concept to game design when you're looking at making an understandable system, when you're looking at making character sheets, whatever have you. I think that there's really specific approaches with that, and there's different schools of thought about it. But I would really be interested in hearing you speak a little bit to designing a lot of the cards and designing a lot of the symbology from the angle of you taking concepts that don't really exist anywhere else. How do you communicate like this specific chord sigil? How do you communicate this? When you're looking, obviously we have an incredibly wonderful team of writers who have built this world and have fleshed it out and created this, really, really deep lore that people can dive into. But even with that as a basis, how did you go about beginning to create symbols that conveyed these abstract concepts of theurgy or of faction or of schools of magic that would eventually be built into the game?
Oh, I mean, honestly, the baseline is I definitely put on my branding brain pretty quickly when it came, because a lot of my, at least my freelance background on top of this was a lot of illustration, but also different branding and design and general design for and like merchandising. And so a lot of what my initial process over the first few years of my freelancing was learning how to say the most with the least amount of like color requirements, of the most streamlined production process, if you will. Because a lot of times I was working with a lot of metal bands, and it's just like, all right, we just need this screen printed strip to be one color, and it's like, okay, like how, but you want this incredibly complex like design, or this real illustration. And so very much I took a lot of that inspiration and how I really fine-tuned and narrowed the scope of my own craft to, so when I approached Blackbirds, there were, for me, it was a way of identifying that at the end of the day, I needed to have a sense of consistency for specific systems. So every, even, and I've seen a lot of different angles, but sort of my design approach, especially for the Court of Outsiders symbols, it was all that they needed to feel like they were part of the same, that they're incorporating the same little notions and visual consistencies to indicate that they all belong or are associated with the same system within Blackbirds, which is obviously a giant amalgamation of systems that come together to form the game as a whole. So it was essentially reapproaching it at a different pace for each section. So there's also the path symbols, and we knew that those were going to be on cards. We knew those were going to people needed to really look at those quickly and know, okay, like if this is an ability that I can get now because I'm going, down the path of charm and manipulation, or the path of bow and blade, it needed to convey that information, that, yeah, exactly as you noted, that the writers and developers of the game, but very quickly, where someone can look at a symbol and know instantly, okay, that card costs, two of Shadow and Subterfuge. It's honestly like, it's really a similar design philosophy that I think is what makes games like Magic the Gathering incredibly successful through their mana symbols and usage, where you can quickly know and have association through just color, through um, for example, like, if a card is mono red, you typically know that it's going to induce damage, it's going to be sacrificing, it's going to hit fast, it probably has haste. Like, there's a lot of keywords and associations that literally, by just looking at the color of the card, you kind of already narrow your scope as to what's going to be there. So for me, it was, in a way, not ripping that philosophy, but coming from a similar approach. That philosophy comes from branding, from transferability. So the idea, even with, especially with the past, it was like, okay, how do I create something where all of these visually look aligned, like they belong in the same group of system, but then what's the differentiations? How do we communicate then of cost of the actual mechanics, utilizing those? So for me, it's as always, aesthetics is important, and that's why, like, for the path icons, I got inspired by medieval merchant stamps, these sort of more simplified pieces that could be highly transferable. And that was more or less the aesthetic tone that I wanted to create. So it felt still part of that, late medieval, proto-Renaissance general coat of paint influence, but simplified enough to where they could be transferable and placed on a card. They could be placed on the back. They could be placed in anything that comes forward much easier, where it's more or less thinking of all of these different symbols and elements that I developed as multi-use versus they're just being used for this one thing. And that's where I think a lot of my work really started to drastically differentiate from a lot of the key art, because a lot of times the key art was, if you have a cover, you want to make sure that that stays consistent. But a lot of my AD work was also, okay, like, how do we ensure that this can be utilized in multiple areas? It's the same with the icons, where I just needed to understand that they're not just being placed in one space. And rather than designing for that one space, it's designing something that can be adaptable to multiple spaces. And that's always been my design philosophy, or at least the visual design philosophy, when it comes to more of the actual, like, branding and consistency side. And from me, it shows throughout my work. It started with Lancer, designing like corporate state visuals and symbols. And for me, I instead of thousands of years in the future, I went and had to shift to medieval. I had to shift to a different aesthetic entirely. But ultimately, with a tabletop RPG, it's still communicating those systems. It's still communicating the game, with the goal to not only help envelop the players in that aesthetic, in that world, but to also just communicate to them those necessary expectations, or those necessary systems that will just make their experience all better.
It's something that's really interesting to me when it comes to, you reference Magic in particular, and the mana system, and how accessible it is pretty much instantaneously once you learn kind of the basic rules around it. It does convey it in a way that is really, really useful when you're in a table scenario, especially. Because from a player angle, with the cards especially, it makes it much simpler to navigate the complex system of theurgy. When you have a visual system that allows you to do that, and when you have an understanding of iconography within this game, that makes it more accessible. I think that you've done a really great job with that. In the game in particular, that I think people are really, really going to enjoy. We have about 5 minutes left episode, so go ahead and, if you'd like, open it up to questions from the audience. So, anybody who is listening in on Twitter Spaces, there is a little icon down at the bottom of your screen where you can raise a hand for a microphone. And if you would like to ask a question in the next 5 minutes, please feel free to. I can add you at any time. And in the meantime, I can just hit you with some really rapid-fire questions.
Absolutely.
This is, I always do a lightning round right toward the end while we're just opening up the floor.
This is the greatest challenge. This is for me to be. You're asking me to be concise here. So honestly, great approach.
All right. What in particular do you hope people are going to see in the book?
That goodness, what people see in the book, that there is a soul to it. There is an endless sense of passion coming from the team, to not only facilitate a space within the RPG industry, the RPG community, but also just to note that um, there's intention in the game, but also more or less it's about invoking a very exciting and wonderfully horrendous world that just honestly can allow people to have really crazy, incredible moments at the table that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Are there any design Easter eggs in the book that we should look for?
I'm sure there is a good amount. I will say that I'm not immediately as privy to, but I will say absolutely this game is incredibly spiritually symbolic of the work of Miura, of Berserk. I think just it's perfect timing for those enjoying Elden Ring, enjoying sort of this reinvigoration and next stage of dark fantasy. There's a lot of Easter eggs and just notions that people will pick up on, and I hope you enjoy them to your extent. Feel free to definitely reach out to the Blackbirds Twitter whenever you see that. If you need to be like Leah pointing, for that lovely meme. Like, I hope people keep doing that, because there is just a lot of like just fun, subtle references to a lot of beloved dark fantasy media and beyond.
Absolutely, and I'm really and truly hoping they see plenty of replies on the Blackbird side.
Yeah.
With every single little Easter egg that's been stuck into the book, because there are definitely lots. Two final questions for you before we sign off for this episode. Can you, in one sentence, summarize one, what your experience working on Blackbirds has been, and two, what Blackbirds is to you?
So to clarify, that's 2 sentences, correct?
Yeah,
so one
2 sentences. one for each.
Okay. All right. I have my threshold. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
the ADHD kicking in.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think to your experience working on Blackbirds and working with all the artists and writers involved and seeing the final product, what is that to you? What does that mean to you? And then secondly, for second sentence, you had to describe Blackbirds to somebody who had no idea what it was. How would you summarize it?
Perfect. So the first is, I would probably even just say, this is only the beginning. I'll just leave it to that. And the second notion to describe Blackbirds to someone, gosh, that's such a good question. Just Blackbird's approaches areas that are approaches historical references and media references that are coming into prominence today, for better or for worse, but ultimately in a way that still allows you the choice of what to do, of what you want to be, but also allows, in the depths of despair, in these wild times, a sense of choice, but also an appropriate methodology of challenging the greater powers that be, even if ever so daunting or seem untouchable. Is that the methodology is always through collaboration, camaraderie, in order to even try. Failure will always be guaranteed, but and also, and I think just with that noted, but it doesn't hurt to try. And I think Blackbirds, and as a whole, is this, it rewards you for trying and failing in the best possible ways. And I cannot emphasize enough, games are just ideas that facilitate the space for people to fail triumphantly and in the most weirdest of ways, is one to at least give a try.
I think that's a fantastic summary.
Well, couple extra sentences, so sorry I broke that promise.
It's an almost 700-page book. I think that more than a sentence is more than justified.
True.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode, Rob. It's been really, really great having you.
Absolutely. No, this was pure joy. So I hope people enjoyed, and I hope people eventually get to, if they haven't already, get to dive in and see what Blackbirds is all about. There's a lot of love that went into this book, and like I said in that first one sentence answer, that this is only the beginning.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody who joined us to tune in. Blackbirds will be available in the coming weeks after Gen Con if you would like to get a hold of your own copy. And in the meantime, to wet your whistle with some dark fantasy from the world lands of Erebos, I would highly suggest heading over to TribeThruRPG and checking out our free quick start there. I've been your anonymous host, TableTalkRPG, and our esteemed guest has been Rob Sather. Thank you so much again, everybody, for joining us, and again to you, Rob, for joining us.
Of course. Bye, everybody.